The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, when this inquiry was first set up, Transparency International and the UK Tax Justice Network said it would not allay the fears and the claims being made about New Zealand's position as a tax haven. Now, there are two groups which are experts, not like the so-called expert they chose for this inquiry. The PM announced this review at the same time he asserted again the integrity of the New Zealand trust laws when it came to taxation. He said, if our system has any integrity, sorry, that's what somebody else said. If our system has any integrity, this review would not be required. The fact is, from expert international comment, our system and its integrity was under grave question. And it emerged from the Panama Papers, which the Prime Minister sought to deny the import of. Now, Mr. Key knew about this a long way back. In 2011, Mr. Key knew of the Santa Teresa case when Geoffrey Taylor linked New Zealand company SP Trading to smuggling 35 tonnes of North Korean weapons into Iran. Mr. Key knew when Minister Simon Power back then alerted him to what was going on in New Zealand entities back as far as 2011. And a principal of Santa Teresa, in a plea bargain in Brazil, where he was picked up purely by mistake, admitted the money laundering operation that he was involved in. So the Prime Minister decided to carry on his bluster, and first of all, he was going to have an inquiry by a man in the IRD. The problem with the man in the IRD, his reputation lasted exactly 24 hours until it got unearthed that in the wine box inquiry that some members of this House don't want to remember, he was debunked as being an expert. He was seriously exposed as not knowing what his job was. He was seriously a person who believed that form was far more important than substance. And as a consequence, within 24 hours, the Prime Minister was talking about getting an overseas expert. Not a New Zealand expert, no, an overseas one. And then that got flicked for a man called Sherwin, in fact, John Sherwin, who we are told by the media of this country, and I love that expression, that he is a tax expert. Really? Well, in the Westpac Banking Corporation, which ended in a Westpac Banking Corporation IRD dispute, which ended with 4 Australian banks settling for $2.2 billion in December 2009, guess who he was involved for? The banks. And second, he gave expert advice in the Penny and Hooper case in the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court. The two of the highest courts in our land dismissed his evidence as being inappropriate from an expert witness. So it's not me saying it, it's not New Zealand First saying it, it is two of the highest courts in our land now saying it. And third, he was dismissive over the Cook Islands wine box allegations, preferring form over substance, a misguided view overruled by the Privy Council, the Court of Appeal, that's the Privy Council in London, by the way, Court of Appeal and New Zealand High Court. And fourth, Mr. Sherwin had been giving advice to the New Zealand government for years. He is no tax expert. And so he came out with a report. Now, before we get to the report, anyone that was an expert seeking to do his job by his country, that is, clean up the country's reputation, would have first asked to see the terms of reference and demanded that they gave him or her the power to get to the truth. Well, apparently, he had a discussion about the terms of reference with Mr. Key, and as for the powers to get to the truth, he didn't ask for them. He didn't ask for them. And out comes his report telling us less than we already know. Let me tell you a couple of the principal statements that come out of his report. He said, in theory, listen to this, in theory, the current rules should be sufficient to deter tax abuse.
In theory.
In theory.
In theory. Pure theory.
Well, you know, that's astonishing from a professional. He's not talking about practice.
That sounds like an expert.
What's actually happening, what's going on behind closed doors, what's not transparent, what's secret. No, he says in theory. And then he went on to say this, to this extent, anti-money laundering rules should ensure funds held are for legitimate sources. Now, I've seen some naive people in my time, I can tell you. A lot of them across the aisle over here. But I have never thought that someone calling himself an expert could write something like that. Money laundering, anti-money laundering rules should ensure funds held are from legitimate sources. Mr. Speaker, we're not interested in a theory. This inquiry was meant to be about what was going on, or the practice that was ripping this country's reputation apart. Now, he didn't find, Mr. Sherwin, any direct evidence of illicit funds because he never had the powers to find out the truth. And he never asked for them. And he never asked for them.
You don't want to know.
And to say that the Panama Papers' reputational damage to New Zealand will be offset by any future moves to tighten disclosure rules in reality means the government gets away with another cover-up. Yep. The government could not have written a weaker report itself. It didn't give the inquiry the powers to get to the truth, and Mr. Sherwin, who is a tax expert in inverted commas, didn't ask for them. So what we had was media completion of the circle, the government in denial, an inquiry which didn't get at the facts, and then someone saying, I've got a few things you should do. Now, given Mr. Sherwin's background, New Zealand First, unlike the other parties, and it's wrong for the Green member to say we supported his appointment. No, we did not. We knew we'd get a soft report that would never get at the truth and wouldn't finger anybody that would be of embarrassment to the government. This despite the fact that the trusts were building up in recent years by 500%. The number of trusts flocking here in their thousands to be formed was building up by a factor of 500% in recent years. Now, as I said at the time, Mr. Key looked like some boy who'd been whittling behind the couch and he's trying to tell Mum the cat did it. It's pathetic in the extreme that a first world democracy from a man who came from Merrill Lynch, meant to be an expert in finance, mind you.
No, he's a dealer.
That's because he's a money dealer.
He's just a dealer.
And who's Merrill Lynch? Well, they're a corrupt bunch of American Wall Street thieves who went belly up and had to be bailed out by who? The American taxpayer.
That's right.
It is no training school for somebody who understands integrity and honesty. That's Merrill Lynch. And by the way, they're back again, Merrill Lynch. All the same old feet and the same old troughs, screwing the American public, and they wonder why Donald Trump is winning on one side and Bernie Sanders almost won on the other side.
That's right.
Because the American system, when it comes to these matters, is crook. Now, what did Mr. Key say? This is what he said this morning. I basically said New Zealand is not a tax haven. That's what he said this morning. Well, he's talking about John Sherwin, agrees with that perspective. I said there is full disclosure of information. There is when it's asked for, Mr. Key said. What a duplicitous, deceiving mind. So here you've got all these trusts set up. No one knows what their name is, who's connected with it. You have to have a New Zealand name attached to it. But as to who's behind it, no one knows. And Mr. Key says it's adequate that the information will be disclosed when it's asked for. In short, how on earth, that's right, my colleague, Tracy Martin very wisely says, you've got to be a psychic. You've got to be a soothsayer. Or more importantly, you've got to be someone with practical knowledge that knows that some people in this world, befriended by the National Party, are a bunch of crooks. Like they were in the Cook Islands, like they were with the Wine Box Inquiry, and like now. And can I just say this morning, I happened to listen on the way to the airport, the most painful interview. It was Mr. Woodhouse being interviewed, and I've never seen someone make such a sorry, sad, I can't use the word to go with it, fool of himself. It was an unbelievably torturous is the word, isn't it? Torturous, turgid in the extreme, tissue of fabrication of nothing on the behalf of a man that claims to be a professional. Now, frankly, we don't need ministers in charge of the IRD like that. We need to do what you say, sir, wind them out, yeah. Take them out. Get somebody who's responsible. In fact, listen to a party called New Zealand First who said from the word go, this would be a whitewash, and it is.
The Honourable Amy Adams.